With the Secret of the Mimic trailer out, we're finally getting a look at the Mimic's backstory through one of the games, and we got a substantial amount of information from the trailer alone, with a lot of it seeming to draw from the original Mimic story in the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. However, while a large portion of the community seems to believe this proves that the Tales books are in the same timeline as the games, also known as the Tales games theory, there's a significant number of fans that think it's evidence towards the exact opposite. So what does the trailer really tell us about the Mimic story? Are the books accurate to the games, or is there anything that would imply they're separate? Well, stay tuned, because I'm going to explain just what evidence the trailer has for the Tales games theory and what I think the story of Secret of the Mimic will actually be. But before I get into that, I just wanted to announce really quickly that I've launched memberships for the channel. Benefits for members include custom emotes and member badges, priority reply to comments, and monthly members-only videos depending on the tier you sign up for. While benefits for me include being able to pay for my next year of college because unfortunately my scholarship did not renew. So if you're interested in any of the membership benefits, give it a look. I would really appreciate it. Anyway, for those who may not have seen the trailer, it starts with the Fazbear Entertainment van pulling up to what's presumably the location we're going to be in during the game, as the voiceover explains that one of Fazbear Entertainment's contractors, Edwin Murray, disappeared with Fazbear property abandoned in his warehouse. Our job is to go in and get the technology Edwin was working on for Fazbear, specifically an endoskeleton that can fit in any character costume and become that character. We're shown a few examples of these characters, including Jackie, a Jack-in-the-Box clown that appeared in December's Help Wanted 2 content update, as well as a blue mushroom man and a white tiger with green and blue eyes. The voice also warns that they suspect the endoskeleton may be malfunctioning, so there's a chance of injury. And because it wouldn't be Fazbear Entertainment without them downplaying just how dangerous things are, the voice also says they expect retrieving the endo will go smoothly despite the risk of death or dismemberment. We get some nice shots of the location, including a costume with a dead guy's arm sticking out of it, and a fun prototype Music Man jump scare before the voice denies all liability Fazbear Entertainment may have for sending you into a death trap with an endoskeleton that has murderous tendencies. For those who are familiar with the story titled The Mimic in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, the connections are pretty obvious. For those who aren't familiar or need a refresher, The Mimic is a story that comes in two parts. The first part focuses on Edwin Murray, who sold his company to Fazbear Entertainment when the death of his wife and having to raise his son as a single parent led to him being unable to save his failing vacuum business. In the story's present, Edwin and his 4-year-old son David live in Edwin's factory where Edwin makes animatronics for various Fazbear characters like Chica and Bonnie. But David, being a small child who needs attention and isn't old enough to be in school, has a tendency to get on his father's nerves while Edwin is supposed to be working. Realizing he doesn't have the time to give David the attention he needs and do his job at the same time, Edwin makes his son a playmate inspired by how he made David a white tiger bed to mimic David's favorite toy, a white tiger plushie. Edwin designs a legless endoskeleton called the Mimic, programmed to imitate what it sees, and the Mimic does its job pretty well, imitating David eating food, drawing scribbly pictures, and even copying the way David held his white tiger plushie. All's well and good until David dies in a car accident, and Edwin has a breakdown after he sees the Mimic continuing to mimic his son. In a fit of rage, he does his best to beat up the Mimic, but unfortunately for him, Five Nights at Freddy's is a series where you do not want to feel strong negative emotions in such close proximity to any animatronic endoskeletons, because those emotions will leak out into the environment and latch onto the metal of those endoskeletons pretty hard. As such, Edwin's murderous rage flowed from him into the Mimic, which leads into the story's part 2. This portion of the Mimic story follows a team of Fazbear Entertainment workers who were sent to Edwin's factory after he disappeared, and the property ended up in Fazbear Entertainment's hands due to the breach of contract. They were told to clean and fix stuff up as necessary, but not much more than that. What they also weren't told was that a month before, a different team had been sent to that location. One of the workers only finds out after finding a satchel left behind by a member of the previous team, along with a device that had recordings of what the previous team was doing. Turns out, in addition to doing some temporary patch jobs on the leaky roof and finishing up some projects that were laying around, the original team found a certain legless endoskeleton that seemed pretty advanced, so they decided to take a pair of legs from another non-functional animatronic and stick them on there. As you can probably guess, giving the literally rage-filled murder machine additional means to get around did not go well for them. Despite Team B's efforts to hide under piles of moldy lace from before Edwin bought the factory, find an escape route that didn't involve the front doors that closed behind them and locked from the outside as soon as they walked in, or just generally survive, they all ended up dying pretty brutal deaths, which seems to be where we come in during Secret of the Mimic. After the A and B teams failed, we're sent in as Team C and tasked with getting a hold of the Mimic. However, this is where things start to get a bit complicated on the debate side of things. While it seems pretty straightforward that the premise of the game leads in from the events of the Mimic story in Tales, some people have claimed that elements of the trailer contradict Tales in a way that makes the Tales games theory impossible, or at least unlikely. But are those supposed contradictions actually valid, or are there explanations that could prove Tales games still works? For example, one thing that was quickly pointed out was that the Fazbear representative in the trailer claims that Edwin made the Mimic specifically for Fazbear Entertainment, which is absolutely clearly not the case in the Tales story where he makes it for his son. However, Fazbear Entertainment notoriously lies about things, so it's possible that Fazbear is just claiming Edwin made the mimic for them. Though this does lead to the issue of how the heck Fazbear found out about the thing in the first place. In the Tales story, Edwin didn't make the mimic for them, and the entirety of both the A and B teams were very dead by the time all was said and done. So unless Edwin told Fazbear about his son's robot playmate for whatever reason, there'd be no way for Fazbear to have heard about it if Secret of the Mimic is the third attempt at checking out the building after Edwin dipped. That being said, if we're not the C team, but rather the D or even E team, it could be possible that a member of a C team did make it out and report somehow, despite the front door supernaturally locking itself and the windows being boarded up for both the A and the B teams. Then maybe they refused to go back or something, so we were sent in and actually given a clue about what we were getting into. I personally think it's a bit of a stretch, but it's possible, so I think it should be mentioned. There are also some other things that can be explained away pretty easily, like the mushroom costume in the book being fuchsia, where in the game, Mushroom Man is blue. For all we know, maybe there were just two costumes or something. Minor things that don't really matter and do have plausible explanations. However, there are several things that are a lot more difficult to explain away that I think haven't been given the weight they deserve. For example, Edwin Murray in the books was not a contractor for Fazbear Entertainment. Yes, he did have a contract with them in the books, but that was because he sold his family company to them, making him an employee under the Fazbear Entertainment umbrella, not a contractor. After all, if someone is a contractor, legally speaking, they are hired to provide services for another company but are not employed by them. For example, I could be considered a contractor thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Raycon. Raycon's everyday earbuds come with some pretty awesome features, like 32-hour battery life and multi-point connectivity, which I'm personally a big fan of since it makes it possible to pair the earbuds with two devices at once instead of just having to manually swap from my computer to my phone when I want to listen to music on my way to class. And when I am walking to class, the everyday earbuds active noise cancellation feature makes it easier to tune out the chatter of the crowd so I can focus on the music. They also come in a variety of colors so you can pick out a style that works best for you. I picked out the purple ones personally since purple is one of my favorite colors and also Urple guy, and I really like how they look, especially since they match the protective case cover, which I also like the vibe of. So if this sounds good to you, make sure to check them out. And hey, if you don't end up a fan of the earbuds, Raycon has a 30-day happiness guarantee refund policy, no questions asked. So you don't need to be worried about giving them a try. If you're interested, go to buyraycon.com/idfantasy to get 20% off the best-selling everyday earbuds. Brought to you by Raycon. Anyway, while I may be a contractor, Edwin in Tales from the Pizzaplex was not, and I can't see a reason why Fazbear Entertainment would lie about that. Lying about the mimic being made for them makes sense, since that would give an even more solid foundation for the claim about it being their property. But why call Edwin a contractor when he isn't one? It just seems really weird to me unless, in the game version of events, he didn't sell his company to them and Fazbear Entertainment legitimately just contracted his services and the two companies worked closely together, hence the Fazbear posters and stuff all over the place. Similar to how Scott Cawthon owns Five Nights at Freddy's, but Steel Wool associates itself heavily with FNAF since they are the company hired to make the recent games. If this were the case, it would also explain another compatibility issue between the book and the game, namely, the extremely notable differences they have regarding the state of the building the mimic is in, and I'm not referring to how the trailer calls it a warehouse while the book calls it a factory. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, the factory's in pretty rough shape. The first floor windows are boarded up and there's piles of moldy lace everywhere since Edwin had largely left all the lace and lace-making machinery that was there when he bought the place lying around. Some offices in the top portion of the building were modified into a living space for Edwin and David, and there was a slide on the staircase for David to play on, but other than that, the building looked old and abandoned. Contrast that with what we see in the trailer where, yeah, it's abandoned in the sense that Edwin left, but it looks nothing like described in the book. There's no piles of moldy lace, it looks to be in generally good condition and like it was actively used as a well-functioning business. Not to mention, the official game description calls the place Murray's Costume Manor, which is also likely referring to the building from Help Wanted 2's content update, since it has the same symbol as the top of the puzzle in the update that's labeled with the initials of Murray's Costume Manor, MCM. Why would Edwin Murray's factory be officially considered a costume manor given his business that he sold was a vacuum company? One could argue Fazbear Entertainment forced him to make the factory into a costume manor, but that doesn't explain why it would be named after Edwin if he did sell his company to them like in the books. It also wouldn't explain why both the A and B team in the book are exploring something that does not match what we are shown in the Help Wanted 2 and Secret of the the Mimic trailer. Unless someone managed to overhaul the entire building with the Mimic actively hunting them down, or they moved the Mimic to a different building Edwin somehow also had when he was too broke to own a house separate from his factory instead of just to wherever Fazbear wanted the Mimic to end up, this building is incompatible with what we see in the books. Even more incompatible is just the FNAF timeline generally. Based on the original teaser from last year, Secret of the Mimic takes place in the year 1979. Meanwhile, part 2 of the Tales from the Pizzaplex story takes place in January, about a month after the A-Team was scoping out the place in December. If we're sent the same year as Team B, and assuming the A-Team was sent the same year Edwin disappeared, that would make part 1 of the story take place in the year 1978. 5 years before that, Edwin was 24 years old and his wife was pregnant with their son, which would be in the year 1973. Meanwhile, the Tales from the Pizzaplex story, The Storyteller, takes place at the fully functional Pizzaplex when Edwin is 64 years old, which, based on the dates we're given, puts the events of The Storyteller in the year 2013. Meanwhile, FNAF 3 takes place 30 years after Freddys closed. And even if you went with the earliest known closing of Freddys after the missing children incident in 1985 instead of FNAF 1, that would still put the game in 2015. And since FNAF 3 is a prerequisite for Pizzeria Simulator, which the Pizzaplex is built on top of, it is literally impossible for the timeline of events in the books to work with the games. While sure, sometimes the books can be weird with dates and ages, such as the Silver Eyes having Charlie go missing in 82 while her grave is marked 83, with the age the robot version of her claims to be not matching either of those options, the time spans and ages given in the Mimic plotline of Tales are entirely internally consistent. While on its own I could see it being written off as a mistake, it's not just the dates that's the problem. It's the state of the factory, it's Edwin being a contractor, it's Fazbear knowing about the Mimic. Yeah, sure, you could probably find some way to explain a decent portion of it, but would that really make more sense than this just being the way it is in the games, given this is a franchise with multiple timelines to begin with? Would it really make more sense for Fazbear to be lying about both hiring Edwin to make the Mimic and him being a contractor? For there to be someone sent in before us who escaped to tell Fazbear the Mimic existed in the first place? For the factory to somehow become Murray's costume manor after Edwin disappeared despite the Mimic loose in the building and Edwin not being there? There's a philosophical principle called Occam's razor, which basically says that the simplest solution tends to be the correct one, though I also employ the policy of trying to make sure all evidence is actually accounted for. While there might be a way for Tales games to work, I think Occam's razor suggests that rather than Tales flat out being the game's story, concepts from the books that are compatible with the story wanted for the games are pulled in, while things that don't work as well are altered or left behind as necessary to make things narratively cohesive and understandable to an audience that, if we're being honest, largely has not read the books and needs to get the backstory without having to do hours worth of external research. I see this similar to how the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is based on the first game and has a lot of similarities in its character names and location, but also has major changes to its characters and the story to make it work for the different medium and to accommodate an audience that wouldn't necessarily have all of the backstory that dedicated fans would be aware of. No matter how many similarities it does have, the fact that there are differences that are 100% incompatible with the games makes the FNAF movie a separate continuity from them, and I personally think that evidence points to Secret of the Mimic being a similar case. With Edwin being a contractor instead of an employee and having a full-blown costume manor with a gift shop and everything, the most straightforward solution I can see is that in the games, Edwin actually made a successful company, but only when he focused on animatronics and costumes rather than vacuums. My guess is circumstances in the game timeline were different enough to where, when vacuums started failing, Edwin was able to shift gears into Murray's costume manor. Since in the books he sold his company because he couldn't manage saving his failing business after his wife died in childbirth and he became a single father, his success here could be because his wife didn't die, so he was actually able to save his company. He may have even made the Mimic for Fazbear Entertainment rather than his son, considering the white tiger in the trailer is a mascot costume that was never mentioned in the book, rather than David's plushie. The Mimic still ends up getting made either way, people die, and we get sent in to clean up the mess. But it would be presented in a way that would make sense to people who might only be playing the games rather than reading the books. But hey, this is all just a theory based on a trailer. The game could provide ways to make more things compatible with Tales that I haven't thought of, and I don't blame anyone for believing Tales games to be accurate given the number of similarities there are. I just personally think the differences are pronounced enough that the Tales books work best as a separate continuity that just so happens to have a lot of similarities to the games. But hey, I guess we'll see when the game comes out in June. Don't forget to check out channel memberships if you're interested in the exclusive content. Don't get stabbed, and have a nice day.